This program is brought to you by realestate.com.au, Australia's #1 address in property. With more properties for sale than anywhere else, we make it easier.
Welcome back. There are 2,403 auctions scheduled to take place across Australia this week, and that's up 13% when compared to the same week last year. New South Wales will hold 913 auctions, with 785 of them in Sydney. Victoria will hold 1,010 auctions, with most of them in Melbourne. Queensland will hold 280 auctions, with about half of them in regional areas. South Australia will host 101 auctions, with most of them in Adelaide. Western Australia, Tasmania and the Northern Territory will hold 16 auctions between them. And the ACT will hold 83 auctions. Taking a look at the most viewed properties going to auction this weekend. And in New South Wales, the top property is 92 Foreman Avenue, Glenwood. This 3-bedroom home is close to the Bella Vista Metro Station. Asking price is $950,000. The top property in Victoria is 327 Highbury Road, Burwood. This 5-bedder comes with three bathrooms and a large garden. Price guide is $1.3 to $1.42 million. The top property in Queensland is 35 Lagoon Park Drive, Maudsley. This giant home sits on a level block that's almost 10,000 square metres. There's a pool, parking for 10 cars, plus a lot more. The top property in South Australia is 54 Hereford Avenue, Trinity Gardens. This large 5-bedder has been extensively renovated with modern finishes. It's located just to the east of the Adelaide CBD. And the top property in the ACT is 83 Fitchett Street, Garran. This 4-bedder has a pool, basketball hoop and offers views of the Brindabellas. And the most viewed property on the REA Group website this week is in Hobart, Tasmania. The address is 10 Goodhart Place, Sandy Bay. This 4-bedder has 2 bathrooms, sits on about 700 square metres and has space to park 3 cars. The property was designed and built by Frank Bobrowski in 1965, and it features a mid-century modern design with expansive floor-to-ceiling glass windows, lots of wooden walls and cabinets and sandstone feature walls, plus an abundance of natural light. Set over 3 levels, the property also includes a self-contained apartment that mirrors the upstairs design. The artistic home's surrounded by bushland and is close to walking tracks. The real estate agents, they're taking offers over $1.27 million for this one. And for more on property, I caught up with Angus from REA Group a little earlier.
It's going to be a pretty busy weekend this week and next weekend as we head into spring. It is typically the busiest time of year. It's particularly driven by Sydney and Melbourne, where we're seeing kind of 20% more than what we were seeing last year at same time last year to kick off spring in both cities. So pretty busy starts to spring for both those.
How have clearance rates been holding up over the last few weeks?
They've been fairly good, not as good as perhaps we were seeing in autumn this year, but still kind of sitting around that low 60s, to mid 60s range, which is certainly a lot better than we were seeing, earlier in the year or late spring last year when clearance rates were sitting down at sort of low 50% or even below 50% some weeks.
We had a Super Saturday last week in Victoria. Are you expecting plenty of those to happen over the next few months?
I would expect we'll start to see a lot more activity. It is normally the busy time of year in spring. Activity tends to ramp up in towards October, November. Those tend to be the busiest months of the year typically. Obviously it varies year to year, but normally that's when we see the peak of property market activity. So yeah, I think the signs are pointing towards that. And thus far this winter, we're probably pointing towards that as well. We have actually seen a pretty busy midwinter in Sydney and Melbourne. So in July, which, a little bit dated now, but midwinter, we actually saw more than typical new properties hitting market in both Sydney and Melbourne. So pretty busy, still midwinter, so still quiet overall, but relative to what was normal, it was busier.
1st of September today, so you got the new property price report out for August. How did prices track during the month?
So much like we've seen throughout a lot of this year, prices were up a bit in August, So we did see prices up 0.3% nationally. That was led by Adelaide, which it's been one of the strongest cities throughout this year. Prices are up 7.5% compared to a year ago, which is really very strong. But it was also led by Sydney, where prices are up 0.5%, which is pretty strong. And actually, that's been the story in Sydney this year. Prices have recovered pretty well after the falls last year. We saw falls last year of sort of circa 7%. Since the end of last year, prices are now up a little bit over 6%. So we're only just around about 1%, a little bit over, below where we were before the RBA started raising rates, which is pretty remarkable given how quickly the RBA has raised rates.
We've got some charts we can put up showing these capitals. Let's start with Sydney. Prices there you can see on the screen, looks like the price growth is more towards the sort of central suburbs around the CBD in Sydney. Is that kind of fair assumption?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We did see through last year, it was those sort of inner city areas that led the downturn. And then this year, they've been the ones that have bounced back more strongly. And that's kind of a consistent feature we see in price cycles. Those more expensive inner city areas do tend to be a bit more cyclical. They tend to rise by more when prices are rising, fall by more when prices are falling. So that's kind of consistent with that story. But I think there's probably a little bit more going on in inner city areas, particularly in places like Sydney and Melbourne. We probably are starting to see demand for those areas in a way.
Yeah, let's have a look at Melbourne. Quite a difference compared to Sydney there.
Yeah, we're just not seeing nearly as strong growth in Melbourne as we are in Sydney this year. Melbourne prices have stopped falling. So it is a change from last year when they were falling. But they certainly haven't recovered at the same sort of pace that we've seen in Sydney or in places like Brisbane, and certainly not as strong as Adelaide or Perth. So still pretty soft in Melbourne, but prices are at least not falling now.
Let's have a look at Brisbane. This chart, I think, looks a little bit different to the others. It seems like outer suburbs in Brisbane are the strongest.
Yeah, Ipswich has been a really strong part of Brisbane throughout the last kind of 12 to 18 months. It held up really well throughout, throughout the higher interest rates. Really didn't see price falls. And so that's kind of helped keep that momentum into this year.
Let's look at Adelaide. You mentioned them at the start of the interview. Are they really the standout performer here?
Adelaide and Perth really are, yeah. Adelaide, kind of across the city, we're seeing pretty strong growth. Prices are up a bit over 7.5% compared to a year ago in both Adelaide and Perth, which is pretty remarkable considering what's happened to interest rates. Adelaide's been a standout performer across the pandemic. It's now, relative to pre-pandemic, it's the strongest performing capital city. It's overtaken Hobart. So wow. Strong demand for property there.
Let's quickly look at Perth as well. I know you just touched on them. I guess it's worth noting auction numbers in Perth are a bit lower than the rest, but wow, that is more than 10+% across quite a few regions of the whole city.
Yeah, it's a very strong market, Perth. And part of the story there is there's just not a lot of homes available for sale. The total number of properties listed for sale on realestate.com.au in Perth is at record lows at the moment and has been for basically all of this year. So, we're just seeing very little stock on market, as well as the fact that Perth now, in a way that it really wasn't sort of 10, 15 years ago, that's actually a relatively affordable city. It didn't see as much of a run-up in prices during the pandemic or certainly during the decade prior, kind of post that mining boom. The decade after that, it didn't see as much run-up in prices. So it actually looks a little bit more affordable, which is probably attractive to some buyers.
Well, Angus Moore from REA Group, thanks for your time today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ed.